Hello. In this short video, I'm going to try to accomplish two important tasks that you need to be able to do in order to do the FormantLab homework assignment properly in phonetics this semester. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up the Formant viewer. We're going to set up the Formant tracker for your voice. The second thing we're going to do is set up show you how to use a text grid to annotate your measurements so that you can reproduce what you did. All right, so the first thing, we're just going to open up the sound editor, our good friend, our old buddy, the sound editor window. And in the sound editor window, we're going to want to make a couple of changes to the way Prot is configured on your screen. The first thing we're going to want to do is notice that by default, the spectrogram viewer shows us from 0 to 5,000 hertz. This is not enough. We're going to want to increase the height of the y-axis. I prefer 8,000, so that's what we're going to switch it to. We're going to say Spectrum, Spectrogram Settings, and in the view range, we're going to change the view range from 0 to 8,000 hertz. And this is going to give us enough of a viewable window. See, the spectrograms all got taller. It's going to give us enough of a viewable window that we'll be able to see at least 5 clear formants in our recordings that we've made. All right, so what we see after changing the spectrogram settings is we now have a max spectrogram height of 8,000 hertz. And you can see things are taller. We can see more information about the fricatives. We can see more information about the formant structure. It's hard to see when zoomed out this far what the actual individual formants are. But what I would like to do is take a quick look at each of the vowels. Now, I'm not measuring anything yet. What I want to do is take a quick look at each of the 3 vowels and see if I can count 5 formants, and see if I can figure out roughly what the highest frequency for one of those formants is. So first I'm going to select about the word heed, roughly, and I'll zoom in. I did that by hitting Control-N. You can also do that by saying View, Zoom to Selection, Command-N on a Macintosh. And you can see here that I've got some formant structure. I've got 1, 2, 3-ish, 4-ish, 5-ish. Somewhere in here we've got our fifth formant, and above that is 5,000 hertz is above that 5th formant, right? So notice that. So now I'll zoom back out, and I want to zoom in on the word. This one is hod. Here is hod. And I've got, let's zoom out just a little bit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's my 5th formant. And again, 4,400 hertz. There are 5 formants within about 4,400 hertz. And you have some idea already, having studied acoustic phonetics. You should have some idea where these formants come from and what they mean, and what it means when I say that they occur all within 44 to 5,000 hertz. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's my 5th. So again, it looks like it would be really safe to say that pretty reliably in my speech, even my extreme vowels, heed, hod, and hood, there are 5 formants that occur within 5,000 hertz, within the first 5,000 hertz, right? Which says something about the length of my vocal tract. Now, you might have higher numbers. And in fact, if you're male, if you're larger than I am, you may have lower numbers. If you're smaller than I am, you may have higher numbers still. So what we're going to do is we're going to tweak Prot's LPC, linear predictive coding settings, so that it's going to try to find it's going to try to find formants that are consistent with the size of my vocal tract. And we don't have to do that by just guessing, right? Because we went and looked at 3 of my vowels, and you've got those same 3 vowels for yourself, I can go in and I can say pretty confidently that within 5,000 hertz, Prot should be able to find 5 formants, right? And I will leave the window length set to 0.025, but check that out on the homework assignment. There's a discussion of what shortening or lengthening that window will do. This is a nice compromise. Okay, so now what Prot is going to try to do is within about 5,000 hertz, it's going to try to, when I turn on Show Formants, it's going to try to find my 5 formants, right? So now I can say Show Formants, and I'll get these red dots. And these red dots are Prot's attempt, using LPC, to find the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th formants in my speech. And now we're going to close this window, and we're going to switch to a text grid view, but we are going to use this formant tracker to take our actual vowel measurements. Okay. Now, second task. You've got a sound object. You're going to take a bunch of vowel vowel measurements. And that's true whether you want to do it for this assignment or whether you want to do it for a publishable project or whatever you're doing. You don't want to just take the measurements in the sound editor because then how do you reproduce what you did, right? Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to say annotate to TextGrid. And when you do that, it will create a text file that contains information about the sound that can't be stored in the actual sound file itself. And we're going to do this, and I'm just following along with the instructions here from the homework assignment. We're going to create 2 tiers, one called word, which is going to contain our markings for where the words are, and one called vowel that's going to contain our markings for where the vowels are. And the second one, vowel, is going to be what's called a point tier. We're just going to click once in that tier and mark. That's the spot where we think the vowel is the most like itself. Okay. So in order to open this up, I need to click on both of the objects, which I can do by holding down the Shift key. That works on Linux and Windows and Macintosh. And then, having selected both objects, I can click View and Edit, which will open the TextGrid window. Okay, the TextGrid editor window. Looks very like the sound editor window. We have a waveform, we have a spectrogram, we have but we have 2 new things. We have this yellow bar with a little optimality theory hand pointing at it that says Word, and a white bar. It's actually only white because it's not selected. I can click on it. We have a yellow bar that says Word, and another bar that says Vowel. And Word is going to contain our very rough markings of where the individual words are, right? So this should be heed. Heed. So that's heed. I selected it. You don't have to be as precise as you were in the VOT lab. I selected it just by clicking roughly where there's some silence before the H, and then stopping before the again starts. And let's see. Heed. Now if I press return, it will mark off heed, and I can type in heed so that I can find it again later. And then I can come over here and I can say, all right, here's our friend Hod. I can check. Hod. That sounds pretty good. Hod. And then here is Hood. Hood. Okay. And you don't have to be more accurate than that at this point. We aren't going to use these actual word measurements except to be able to refine the words again later if you decide. Now, one of the things that often happens when you're measuring vowels for the first time is you'll get 5 or 6 vowels in, or 10 or 15 measurements in, and then realize, oh, I've been doing it wrong, or I'm not certain that I've been doing it right the whole time. And you might want to go back and double check your measurements. And Prot is going to make that really easy now that we're creating a text grid for this. All right, so I can click on Heed. I can go to View, Zoom to Selection, which is also Control-N. Zooming to selection will give me a nice view of the word heed, and here are my tracked formants that should be pretty good now that I changed the formant settings in Prot. Okay, so which part of this vowel is most like itself? Well, it's pretty flat from the beginning. It stays pretty flat throughout. We get a bit of a formant contour down into the alveolar closure for the D. So pretty much anywhere here in the middle of the vowel would be good. I'll click here. I'm going to say Control 0 to move the cursor to the nearest 0 crossing. Then I need to put a marker down here in the vowel tier to show this is where I made my measurement. This is where I want to measure vowels. You can do that if you like the mouse. You can click down in the vowel tier and then press return. Or if you don't ever want to use the mouse, you can say under the interval menu, there is an add interval on tier 2 option, which is just Control 2. Command 2 for Macintosh users. And now, we haven't taken any measurements yet, notice. We've got heed marked out, we've got the vowel marked for heed, right where we want it to be. And now all we have to do is go up to the Formant menu and say Formant Listing. And Formant Listing will bring up a little window that has our measurement for F1 for this vowel, 246 hertz. We don't have more significant digits than that. We're not going to go past the decimal point. So just round up to the nearest one. 246 is our measurement for F1 here. 2,466 is our measurement for F2. And that's it. We don't need F3 or F4. We can just close this window and move on to the next vowel, right? So I'm going to do that by hitting Control-O a few times. View, zoom out. Control-O. I can move on to Hod. Zoom to selection. All right, here we're trying to find F1 and F2. This notice we've got this rise of F2 up into the alveolar closure for this low back vowel. So you can find a part of the vowel that is most like itself. This one, again, is pretty easy. I like it there. I'll say Control 0 to move my cursor to the nearest zero crossing. I'll say Control 2 to put in a marker on the second tier. And then I come up to the Format menu and I say Format Listing. It opens up the Format Listing window, and here I have my measurement 719 hertz for F1, 1048 hertz for F2. And I would write that down either in the chart that's on the homework assignment or in Microsoft Excel. And I close it and move on to the next vowel. So I'm not sure why Control O isn't working the first time. Control O out a few times, find Hood, Control N to zoom to the selection. Now here things are a little bit more interesting. The F2 wanders a little more, or begins the rise up into the alveolar closure starts a little bit earlier. But again, we can just find sort of near the middle of the vowel, say Control 0, Control 2, Format Listing, and we can write down 276 hertz for F1, 933 hertz for F2. Now, I would expect your F1 and F2 measurements to be different, right? They're your vowels, not mine. For all of these sounds, I would expect yours to be different. And I can, I'll say zoom to show all. And when you're done, you'll have each of your 15 words all 3 times, or sorry, 13 words all 3 times repeated and marked up now. Heed, hod, etc. And one marking for each of your vowels, and you will have gotten a format listing and recorded that somewhere. And be sure, before you're done, be sure to go up to the File menu and say File, Save TextGrid as File. In fact, you might want to do this a few times while you're working. And save this, you just want to save this in the same folder where, wow, I'm not sure why I sung that. You want to save this in the same folder where you saved your audio file, right? So I've got kevin.wave in this folder somewhere. I'm going to save kevin.textgrid. Note they've got basically the same name. Now I've got those 2 files, and those 2 files are part of what you're going to hand in with your write-up for this homework assignment. Okay? Good luck. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you for your time and attention. Goodbye.